This is Lari Masten, and I'm here with Peter Lohrey today, and we have just a few quick tip comments on 409A valuations and distinctions. We have this great question from a member. The question is, what's the difference between a valuation for 409A purposes versus a valuation for a company that's not a startup that just wants to raise money from an equity standpoint for equity expansion? And I'll start off just by saying, thinking about 409A and 409A, valuation, it's a compliance valuation. It's 409A is a section of the Internal Revenue Code. And the Revenue Code is really identifying deferred compensation package issues. And for compliance with this 409A regulation, startups are required to submit valuation reports when they are giving stock options or deferred compensation in a manner that might indicate that the employee who's receiving it is getting some benefit. So the IRS is basically saying, if you're giving a benefit to an employee and it's deferred in some way, we want to tax that now. So this 409A concept comes from stock options. And to one piece of this question, a startup technically for 409A is defined as a company that has been in business less than 10 years, which was kind of surprising to me, does not have any publicly traded securities, there's no change of control expected in the next 12 months, et cetera. So with that, Peter, I'll toss it to you for a second, just to kind of let's round out this question of what's the difference in evaluation for that purpose that I just described versus evaluation for raising equity for expansion.
Thank you, Lori. Business valuation is both art and science. And so as Lori pointed out, the 409A valuation is a compliance valuation, whereas if you're doing a valuation of a company for financing purposes, hopefully to raise additional equity capital, you have a very different vantage point in terms of how you're approaching this project. Generally speaking, I've encountered many situations where when we're performing a compliance type of valuation, there's pressure on being conservative, but very, very solid in what your valuation report produces. On the other side of that would be the valuation for financing purposes, most often for equity financing. And in that case, it's going to be a little more fluid, a little more, should I say, flexible, because you're really trying to assist the company with raising more capital. Now, you're an independent professional, you're an independent business valuation professional, but every once in a while, there's wiggle room, as we call it. So again, you may have two different companies and you might get a little different estimate of value depending on whether it's the 409A valuation or instead it's a valuation to help the firm raise equity capital.
Yeah, and I think another distinction is the 409A valuations are done, and sometimes they're done multiple times a year, but the consequences are critical that the stock options and the stock appreciation rights that you get, that are qualifying for this exemption under 409A are only available when the fair market value, so the valuation piece that you're looking at, of that stock doesn't exceed the strike price of the option or the appreciation rights on the grant date. So it sounds kind of complicated to say it that way, but embedded in those types of valuations by default is fair market value concepts from 5960 relating to marketability. And in general, 409A doesn't define fair market value, so we kind of have to default back to 5960, Revenue Ruling 5960. And the majority, it presumes that the value of these stocks for the options or the appreciation rights are valued on a non-marketable, non-controlling interest basis. Now, when we're looking at an equity raise, looking to expand, you have to also consider things like, well, maybe is it on a control basis? Are we doing preferreds? Do they have different rights? And so the whole concept of fair market value under one purpose versus the other might be different because you may or may not have the magnitude of those discounts that you would have under a 409A valuation when you're looking at doing an equity expansion? Peter, I mean, in your experience, equity expansion, does that involve control versus non-control?
Generally speaking, when we're looking at the equity financings, my experience has been you're looking at control, because the people that are raising the rounds of funding have the control over the business in order to be able to say, yes, we want to offer more shares. But once the funding rounds are done, then we may be looking at the situation where you have your different discounts for lack of marketability and control.
Yeah, and in my experience too, it's been that usually those equity fund rounding tranches are kind of disguised debt instruments, and so their requirements are slightly different. But anyway, I hope that we've been able to answer the question. Peter, any final comments?
No, I think just to reiterate what Lohrey said, be aware the 409A is a compliance type valuation, and there are significant penalties if you're not complying with the code section 409A. So it's very important that you keep up with this and make sure that you have the appropriate valuation professional to do this type of valuation.
Absolutely, and that's a shield, kind of like, with the 409A compliance, to have the valuation prepared by a credentialed appraiser who does this on a regular basis. Some businesses get a little bit into trouble when they try to, present for their startup their own valuations for those stock option plans. Anyway, thanks. Appreciate your time.